What's going on, everybody? No, really, I want to know. Top 10 Pokemon back, bringing you a great variety of Pokemon card auctions that ended this past week. In today's episode, we will be reviewing several of the graded Japanese cards from the Pokemon TCG Classic set that came out. We'll also be taking a look at the Pikachu Van Gogh promo card and seeing how healthy those graded prices have been. And we'll also be taking a look at a few graded cards from the set Paradox Rift. Big thanks to today's auction recap sponsor. You know them, you love them. It's none other than lowpopping.market on Instagram. If you don't already know, folks, lowpopping.market is the marketplace for high-end Pokemon card investments. On this page, they have a crazy amount of Pokemon cards available for your collection, which includes numerous graded cards from not only PSA, but BGS and CGC as well, along with several autographed pieces and tons of sealed product as well. And don't forget, you can also trade up for any particular item that you see on there. They accept multiple payment methods and shipping is available worldwide. Low Popping is a highly reliable and very highly respected collector in this hobby, and I myself have had numerous positive business interactions with them. So after this auction recap, go to Instagram and follow lowpopping.market. I will link that in the description below. And trust me, folks, you won't be disappointed with the selection they have for you. Alright folks, let's get into this auction recap, starting off with some graded Japanese cards from the Pokemon TCG Classic. Starting off with this PSA 9 Pikachu Holo. These holo cards from this particular set, or deck, if you will, are just absolutely beautiful. Here's a PSA 9 Pikachu that sold for $76. Here we have a CGC 10 Gem Mint Pikachu that sold for $127.50. And then a PSA 10 example of this card did sell for $308. And then later on in the week, we saw the sale of this Pikachu Holo and this Raichu, both PSA 10s, and they sold for $305. Here we have a PSA 10 Bulbasaur that sold for $74, while this PSA 10 Venusaur sold this week for $138. And then we saw a CGC 10 Pristine example sell for $208.50. Here we saw a couple of Blastoise cards. Here's a PSA 10 copy that sold for $128.51. And then we saw this CGC 10 Pristine example that sold for $217. And let me just say, this card is pretty off-centered on the front there, from top to bottom, or bottom top, however you want to say it. So, yeah. And then here is a CGC 10 Pristine Holo Chansey that sold for $43.51. Here we have a PSA 10 Japanese Articuno sold for $111. And then here we have a raw Charizard Holo that sold for $217. And then here is a PSA 10 example that sold for an even $400. And we saw another sale for $430. And then another one that sold for $540. Here we have the evolutionary lineup of Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard, all PSA 10, and it sold for $807. And then here we got the big three front and center, the Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise, and these three sold collectively for $1,175 this week. Now on to some interesting modern card sales. Here is a Pikachu Van Gogh promo card. A little bit of history about this card. When it first came out graded, it was like $1,200 to $1,300 as a PSA 10, and then it swiftly came down to about $600, a little bit more. This week, it's been selling for closer to $500 for a PSA 10. And then we saw a couple of graded cards from Paradox Rift. Here's a special illustration rare Altaria EX that sold for $172. And then here is probably the top dog from this set. It is a Roaring Moon EX special illustration rare that in PSA 10 sold for $791. Up next, we saw the Metal Charizard card from the Celebrations UPC that sold for $2,103 this week. And then here we saw a CGC 10 Pristine Latios Alt Art from Team Up that sold for $2,328 this week. Here we have a lot of 9 PSA 10 Yu Nagaba Evolution promo cards, so every single Evolution plus the EV sold as PSA 10s for $350. From the Japanese 25th anniversary, here's a Black Label Venusaur Holo, sold for $577. And then we saw numerous PSA 10 examples of this Japanese Iono card. If you saw my recent video of the top 10 most graded cards of 2023, this was on it. Regardless, it's still selling for between $900 and $1,000 pretty much consistently this week. And then onto the vintage portion of our video, we saw this PSA 9 Japanese Top Sun Blueback No Number Charizard card that sold for $5,988. Here we have a first edition Magneton Holo from base set in PSA 10, sold for $5,877. We have a no symbol Flareon Holo from Jungle in PSA 10, sold for $711. From Neo Destiny, we saw a first edition Dark Gengar that sold for $1,051. And then here from Neo Destiny as well is a Shining Tyranitar that sold for $1,310. And then here from Neo Revelation, we have an unlimited Shining Magikarp that sold for $1,994, big ones. And then we also saw this Shining Charizard from Neo Destiny that sold for $8,900 this week. A couple of awesome cards from the E-Series. Here is an Expedition Feraligatr Holo, one of my favorite Feraligatr cards of all time. Sold as a PSA 10 for $1,080. And then we saw another Crystal Lugia from Aquapolis, sold as a PSA 10 for $9,100. Here we saw a Gold Star Suicune from EX Unseen Forces, sold for $1,269, and then a Gold Star Flareon from Power Keepers that sold for $2,025. And then one of my subscribers sent me this sale. It wasn't an auction, but it was very interesting. It is a Ditto promo card from Origins 2007. A card I have not seen before. It was listed for $800, but had a best offer accepted price of $525. So a couple of insane Japanese card sales. Here is a PSA 10 Misaki promo Gengar Holo that sold this week for $10,100. And then we saw this full art Giovanni Scheme from the Team Rocket special case in PSA 10 that sold for $7,600. And then we have a few pieces of sealed product to finish off our eBay auctions. Here is a limited collection Master Battle Set box that sold for $4,550. Here's a first edition Fossil Booster box that sold for $9,504. And then we saw this monster sale from TCA Gaming. It is an EX Deoxys booster box that sold for $33,100. And we all know what kind of treasures you can pull from a box like that. On to the PWCC weekly and monthly auction recap. We have this BGS 10 Black Label Alakazam EX Japanese special art card from the Japanese 151 set that sold for $1,530 this week. Here we have a 2012 Black and White Promo Umbreon card that sold for $2,010. Here we have a 1998 Prism Pikachu and Raichu card that you don't see very often. This is a Pop 3 card, is a PSA 10, sold for $4,800 this week. And then here we have a 1997 Bandai Starters Pocket Monster card in PSA 10, sold for $5,640. And then we saw this first edition Ampharos Holo from Neo Revelation, a very difficult card to get in a 10 in any grading company. This one here is a CGC 10 Gem Mint and sold for $1,830. Here we saw a first edition Houndoom from Neo Revelation that sold for $3,960. A first edition Shining Magikarp that sold for $2,880. And then we saw a first edition Umbreon Holo from Neo Discovery that sold for $5,880. Here we saw a Gengar Level X from Arceus that sold for $1,410. And then here we saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint Japanese Top Sun Blueback No Number Charizard that sold for $11,100. And then we're going to finish off this auction recap with a few insane Charizard sales. Here is a Crystal Charizard from Skyridge in PSA 10 that sold for $11,400, while the Japanese version sold for $11,700. And then to finish it up this week, folks, we saw a CGC 10 Gem Mint Shadowless base set Charizard that sold on PWCC for $13,200. But we also saw in the monthly premiere auction this PSA 10 example that sold for over 4 times as much, selling for $56,400. That concludes the auction recap, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate your support more than you know. Don't forget to give the video a like, and don't forget to be a subscriber on your way out if you're not already. I would appreciate that as well. Like I said, that's it, folks. That's all I got. I'll catch you all in my next one.